So we're in week 5 of this Lenten journey, our final week, and we reach a powerful and humbling truth. It's one that takes us from cross to crown. As we've traveled through these 40 days of reflection, self-examination, and sacrifice, we reflect on Christ's ultimate journey: humility, suffering, and ultimately victory. Lent is a season of self-denial where we intentionally lay down things that distract us and they keep us from fully following Jesus. We give up comfort and we turn our attention to Him, and we remember His path, a path that was not one of immediate glory, but one of suffering, obedience, and sacrifice. In Philippians 2, we read of Christ's humble example. It says, "Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though He was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but He emptied Himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross." The King of the universe, God in the flesh, came not in power, but weakness. He came as a servant, embracing suffering before exaltation. This is not the way of the world. And it's not how we naturally think about power and victory. And yet, this is the very way Jesus chose to live. And in doing so, He became our model. We often associate victory with strength, recognition, and advancement. But Jesus' path was different. He came to serve, to love, to sacrifice. His victory came through humility and obedience. Lent is where we intentionally reflect on the cost of following Jesus' example. It's a season to identify with His suffering and to examine where we resist the path of humility and the cross that leads to the crown. The cross of Christ was not a symbol of strength in the worldly sense. It was a symbol of weakness, suffering. Yet through that very suffering, Jesus triumphed. He was exalted, not because He demanded power, but because He surrendered Himself completely. Think about that. The very thing the world sees as weakness, suffering, was the very thing that led to His ultimate victory. It wasn't His ability to avoid suffering, but His ability to endure it, to face it head on with grace and obedience to the will of the Father. Those verses in Philippians 2 start out by saying, "Have this mind among yourselves." The mind of Christ that would cause Him to operate in a way that is completely opposite from how we do as human beings. We like to resist suffering. We want things to be more comfortable, more elaborate, and even more flashy. The world tells us that to succeed, even as followers of Jesus, we need to rise to the top and make a name for ourselves. But that's not the way of Christ. Philippians 2 reminds us that Jesus, who was in the form of God, humbled Himself to the point of death. His humility, not His grandeur, brought glory to the Father. Sometimes as Christians, we mistakenly believe that the best way to serve Jesus is to build bigger, better, more visible lives that might impress others or gain worldly approval. But Jesus' life tells us a completely different story. Jesus' example wasn't about seeking accolades, but about living with intentional humility. His example wasn't about accumulating power, but serving with a loving heart. He came gentle, lowly, and humble. Yet somehow we get caught up in thinking that the more extravagant our lives are, the more we can show the world God's greatness. The opposite is true. The more we humble ourselves, the more we reflect the greatness of Christ. During Lent, we're invited to ask ourselves, where in our lives do we resist the path of humility? Where do we avoid the suffering that could lead to greater glory in Christ? Jesus has already shown us the way. The path to victory is not in avoiding suffering, but in surrendering to it, just as he did. The cross still stands as the symbol of victory, and we must remember that the journey to the crown comes through the cross. Here are some final questions for us to reflect on this week. Will we follow Jesus on this path? Will we embrace humility, self-sacrifice, and the suffering that leads to glory? Will we ask God to show us the places in our heart that aren't fully submitted to him? Lent has been a time to remember his journey and reflect on our own. As we approach the resurrection and the glory of Easter, we must remember that the cross, though it represents suffering, is also the way to experience God's glory. Let's embrace the victory that came from Christ humbling himself, serving others, and living for the glory of God. The cross leads to the crown. From suffering to glory, from death to life. This is the path we are called to follow. May we walk it faithfully with humility and love. We hope that this journey through Lent has been helpful and meaningful for you. And I hope that it's led to a deeper and more profound connection with the Father.